Welcome. You're listening to Island Life with myself, David Kinley, and a series of programmes entitled New World, Old Ways, where we discuss the history, culture, folklore, superstitions and music of the Manx emigres to the New World, the USA, and in particular, the Appalachian Mountains. In today's episode, we are looking at folklore characters, cryptoids and creatures in the Manx folklore and comparing them to the Appalachian folklore. I went along to Culture Vannin to talk to James Franklin.
Before we go across the Atlantic and do our emigration, the superstitious Manx folk, let's go back to the 17th and 18th century in particular, because that's the time when this emigration's happening. And what you could even say today, the Manx are traditionally an exceptionally superstitious bunch, and we still are, aren't we?
Yeah, totally. Or superstitious are just wise. We know what we're doing. We know what's out there, and we're going to take care.
There can't be many places in the world where the bus will remind you to say hello to the Munchvega.
Yeah.
As an absolute first. So, what sort of characters in the folklore with these, with the Manx, well, and still now, let's go through some of the Manx folklore characters before we go to the Americans and do a cross-reference to see if there's any similarities at all. What have we got?
Well, it's an interesting one in that folklore's always going to be changing. And if you go back 100 years, it's one sort of idea. And if you go back 200 years, it's slightly different. And 300 years, it's different again. And we can see this in the different historians of folklore which are going. But some of them, there are constants throughout. And we have, for instance, the Munchvega, the little fellas themselves. We tend not to use the name fairies wherever possible because they might be listening and who knows what's going to happen. And these are generally little people. They're not necessarily littler. And they are people who also inhabit the same spaces as us. We might find them doing the same things as us. We might find them fishing. We might find them going out riding around at night, doing work, eating food. They're just like us, but different. And the wonderful thing about them is that they are indifferent to us. They don't care about us. And if we meet them, they have no moral obligation to be kind to us in any way. And so it's just best to stay away from them and to try and keep them, try and keep on their good side.
Yeah, because they're malevolent.
Yeah. I love the idea of them just having no obligation towards us at all. If we met a stranger, we'd naturally try and be kind or something to them. But the little fellas, no, absolutely zero.
Do they always inhabit the same dimension as us, so to speak, the same dimension as in time and space?
No, I think in the older stories, you get a more physical idea of this is where they live. And if you go to this hill or hillock and start digging, you'll get into their home. You get this very physical idea of this is where they are. But as time goes on, they become more mysterious as such. You might hear them or they might be there, but you won't actually see them. You have this more ethereal sort of movement of what they are.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about, so there's the Munchvega. We also have Bugains. We have Fenodries.
The Fenodries is perhaps an easier one to deal with because it's relatively straightforward.
And we're using plural, it's not a single character as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there are Fenodries. I think a lot of people know the story from Sophia Morrison's Max Fairy Tales where there's a Fenodry. And this is a great big hairy fella who's very shy and he'll hide during the day, but at night time he'll come out and help on the farm. And often they are seen to be almost like a farm helper. And as long as you are kind to them and are good, then they will do the work on the farm. But if you offend them in some way, often by giving them clothes, because they are naked, hairy things, then they will take great offence and disappear off to a different farm and do work there. And there are stories of these all over the Isle of Man. There are ones in Ballaugh Glen, Glen Rushen, Colby Glen, Lizare, Salty Will, Narradale, South Barrule, close to St. Trinian's, all over. And in some places, like in Narradale or Ballachrink, you will find many Fnordri on the farm, which is interesting.
Indeed. Wonderful. And the Begain. Is the Begain, can we use plural?
Yes, totally. Because no Began is like any other Began. They are shape-shifting, weird monsters. And that's perhaps the best way to think of it. They are monsters.
Benevolent or malevolent?
Malevolent.
Okay.
There's nothing good about them. You'll never get a good thing out of a Began. And they are linked to particular places, often dark, creepy sorts of places. And sometimes they're linked to people who've lived, sinners, who've died and can't go to the other world. They will remain behind as a Began. And they can take any form they like. We were talking just before about, in the Bunskull Gaelgach, the Manx language school, they've translated, of course, their books, and the book Where the Wild Things Are, in that they're called Begans. And so this weird ragbag of different monsters is a very good description of what a Began is.
I see. Would we be accurate in saying that it was Begans, let's say, at the top of South Barule, the stories of the stone-throwing giants, because the south of the island's covered in stones all over the place. Would that be a big Began party at top of South Barule and throw some stones around?
That is one of the wonderful stories of stone throwings. Is definitely Begans. It's being angry, causing problems. Yeah. Sometimes, if the stone is just thrown for fun, it will generally be a giant or King Ari or someone having fun. But if it's fighting, it's going to be the Began.
I see. We do have some characters which are localised, such as Johnny Squarefoot under Greneby Bridge, who doesn't. We won't find him under Sulby Bridge. We'll only find him under that bridge. That seems to be the only place for him.
Absolutely.
He's a bit of a cryptoid, really, isn't he? He's made up of all sorts of attributes physically.
Yeah, pig-like and half-human, and older stories have a witch riding round on his back when he was fully pig. And then he moved down to Grenaby, as you say, and this is a story which I'm sure for many people, they'll think, who on earth is this Johnny Squarefoot or Jimmy Squarefoot? Who is he? But if you're Grenaby ways, of course you know who he is.
We know all about him, yes.
Yeah.
But he's localised and he's a single character. So we get no plural out of that. But so there's some of our Manx characters. And before we head over to the across the Atlantic on our emigration to the Appalachian Mountains, one thing becomes apparent: superstition and omens travel. However, the folklore characters don't travel; they stay here, which was something that I was really interested in when I was researching. They said that the penny hadn't dropped, that they were particularly localised, and they're not superstitions. They are actual entities. So it's not an omen, for instance. They are actual characters, which I was really interested in. So when the Manx take their perilous journey across the Atlantic Ocean, end up in Virginia and then to West Virginia, trying to find the Cumberland Gap to get up to Ohio, which seems to be a Manx hotspot, the locals there, the Cherokee, they are greeted, the Manx are greeted with their superstition, not the superstitions, but their folklore characters, which are the Nunahai, which translates as people who live anywhere or forever, and they're also called Yunwai Sundai, the little people. They were already there. And it seems to be virtually every culture around the globe seems to have their own little people in their environments, which is, even the Inuit have got little people right up there freezing away.
It's a lovely thing, that, and it gives credence to the idea that the theory that there's some sort of nature spirit, that they are existing in the spaces as almost, we could see them today as the spirits of the space, and they're not the spirits you want to stay on the right side of, and they are there perhaps to care for you, but more likely it's the case that you want to stay on the correct side.
Yeah. So the Yunwai Sundai, the little people, some of their attributes are they are immortal, benevolent, which is nice to know, and they have the powers of invisibility and telepathy, so they bring messages to you.
That's good.
Yeah, so they're
Good people to know.
Yeah, and because they're protectors and healers, they can actually enter the human soul to heal and to give messages, which is that's rather generous, isn't it? And this is a very familiar attribute for the Manx. They are usually invisible, but can be heard singing and dancing. So we have that a similar attribute with our Munjafeka, don't we?
Yeah.
They do like to get the fiddle out now and again, etc., and drag you into the hill and keep you there for 3 days.
Yeah.
Which is that's lovely. But that's pretty much where anything familiar for a Manx emigree in the Appalachian Mountains arrives. That's where it ends, because then they've got to deal with the Appalachian folklore characters, and boy, are they colourful. And there's really not much benevolence going on. I'll just go through a few of them. Let's have a look. The Fleetwood monster in West Virginia, 10 foot tall, dark body, eyes that glow, claws for hands. Funnily enough, the Fleetwood monster is a relatively early 20th century conception, which is interesting what you said before about environments and what sort of folklore characters can come from environments. And of course, as we get into the late 20th century and stuff, or mid 20th century, etc., they might not be a creature at all. There might be something more superstitious, and like something I picked up on that you mentioned, certain areas become, let's say, UFO sightings and things like that. So things can change of how people perceive the environment if it's a bit spooky, etc., which I thought was very interesting of you.
Yeah, I think often the environments give rise to the stories rather than the other way around. It's not the case that a space it's scary because of the story. Often the story it feels, it comes from the scary space.
Right, yeah.
If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Island Life, A New World, Old Ways with David Kinley. And I'm talking to James Franklin at Culture Vannin, where we're comparing folklore creatures and cryptoids from the Isle of Man and the Appalachian Mountains. Now here's a piece of music which originally was an Irish set dance piece which was composed in the early 1700s, and now in the Appalachian Mountains it's called The Wounded Hoosier. This is what it's become.
I think the most famous of all these Appalachian mountain creatures is Bigfoot, the Sasquatch. He lives in remote mountainous areas, and he's a huge bipedal covered in thick hair, elusive but vocal. So they are very elusive. They don't like to be spotted, and they will make sounds to keep you away, particularly at night time. But covered in thick hair, this rings a bell.
Yeah, this sounds rather like the Fnordery, I think.
Yeah.
Of course, not so much, not confident enough to come towards humans like the Fnordery, who's helping around the farm. But Bigfoot is big, hairy, nervous, shy, hiding in the woods.
And again, it's a character that exists in a number of cultures around the world. The Yeti from the Himalayas, for instance, but just try not to get too far away from the Appalachians there. The Wampus cat is an interesting one from West Virginia, and this actually comes from, I believe the Wampus cat was originally a Cherokee young girl who was taken, etc. So the Wombus cat is 4 times bigger than any mountain cat, so that's huge. The green eyes, huge claws, extremely fast, smells like a skunk, and can shapeshift into a woman.
Wow. Wouldn't want to meet one of those.
No, not at all. The Loveland frogmen from the Ohio mountains. So the Manx have probably bumped into some of the frogmen, bipedal frogmen. And I do like the name Pukwudgie from Massachusetts. So again, the Manx have probably come across them because that's where the Mayflower landed. Less than 3 foot tall, so that's interesting. Human-like with long fingers, ears and nose, grey skin that can glow. They can vanish, start fires, carry poisonous arrows, shapeshift into a porcupine, and they like luring people off cliff edges. So again, it's a really... You want to avoid that one, don't you?
Yeah.
The snallygaster from Maryland is a bird-like with a reptile body, huge beak, metallic in appearance, and one eye in its forehead. So that's a cryptoid. So most interesting there. The skunk apes, they live in swamps. That's right down to the very south of the Appalachians. And they're bipedal, shorter than Bigfoot's, and they're still quite huge, and covered in brownish hair and really, really smelly. I suppose you would be if you were covered in hair and lived in a swamp, wouldn't you? And old Slewfoot in North Carolina. He can run very fast. He's bear-like and faster than any dog. So you're not getting hold of that one.
Mm.
Yeah. And the raven mocker is from Virginia. 7 foot tall, bird-esque, black feathers, white eyes, can shapeshift into a human, malevolent, will eat your soul. Oof. So apparently the raven mocker used to prey on the people who were dying, and it would go into the body and take the soul away.
Goodness, not to a good place.
So people didn't actually die; their soul was taken by the raven mocker. Was the legend. So what all comes into something quite interesting about all this is a quote from W.Y. Evans Vence. Of course, all listeners are familiar with this chap, W.Y. Evans Vence. This is a book that I've got, The Fairy Faith of the Celtic Countries, was released in 1911. And he did spend some time in the Isle of Man, a considerable amount of time with Sophia Morrison collecting tales. For instance, he does describe the slopes of South Barrule being the most rich in folklore stories than anywhere else in the British Isles. So perhaps we should get a plaque up there.
Yeah. Definitely.
But one thing I picked up on his description of all these folklore characters, anthropomorphic personification of the environment. So these folklore characters, whether they're in the Isle of Man or in the Appalachian Mountains, and particularly the Appalachian Mountains, we've just been through a few descriptions there, and they are very particular to their environments. Tall bears and in woods and stuff, furry creatures in swamps, frogmen and all this sort of thing. So there's a lot of environment goes on to these characters, to how we personify them. So that's how they've come about, it seems. It's interesting, isn't it?
It's a lovely idea, the idea of the characters being of these spaces, the personification, as you say. It's, in a sense, it makes complete sense. Mm-hmm. The idea of some of our folklore wouldn't really make sense in the places like Appalachia. It wouldn't really sit very well. In the same way, in reverse, if we were to get these 7 foot tall and bird-esque figures stealing your soul, it wouldn't really make sense in the Isle of Man. And that's very nice to think of, how specialised and localised they are. You were saying before about how Manx folklore characters are localised. You won't find a Morthadoo, if it's here, you wouldn't find it 100 metres up the road. These things are located in particular places, same with big airs, etc. And so it makes sense globally that you'd have entities which are unique to the spaces.
Indeed. So, for instance, the Begairns are not nomadic, they're particular to their area, much like these Appalachian folklore creatures as well. Mm. Whether you're in East Tennessee, East Kentucky or West Virginia, you're going to have to deal with a different chap than your neighbour across the up in the holler. So they've got different things. So I think I would like to try and what we're establishing here is that with the Manx emigres going to the Appalachian Mountains and settling all over the United States over the centuries, superstition and omens travel. Folklore characters are localised. It seems obvious now, but now that I've gone into research, the penny dropped. I thought, gosh, of course, they're localised characters. Yeah, wonderful. I must apologise to the listeners about any background noise, but we're here at Culture Vannin and the Bun School have just gone out for playtime.
Lots of fun, not just ours.
Yes, indeed. James, thank you very much for your time and clearing up that superstition and omens travel. And I'm sure all the listeners will have that quote in their heads forever. Anthropomorphic personalisation of the environment when it comes to folklore characters. James, thank you very much. Mr. Vence, the author, thank you very much for that quote. And thank you very much for Island Life.
Thank you. Good night.
That was good, that.
You've been listening to Island Life, A New World, Old Ways. You can listen back to this programme by subscribing to Manx Radio podcasts using your usual podcast provider. Garamayad, Emu.